I'm Dr. Judy Melinek. I'm a board-certified forensic pathologist, and I just watched the Nolan press conference, and I wanted to share some context for everyone. Being able to definitively state the cause of death after a body has not been found for several days and has been subsequently autopsied twice with signs of decomposition is incredibly unlikely. Drowning is what's called a diagnosis of exclusion, which means that when you've got a fresh body, you want to be able to look at the body and see if there's any other causes of death for that body that is found in water that exclude the death being exclusively a drowning. So for example, if someone is shot and then thrown in the water, you'll have that gunshot and they'll be bleeding and the gunshot will be the cause of death, and the thrown in the water is not the cause of death. It's not even on the death certificate. If a person is strangled and they die from strangulation and then their dead body is thrown in the water, their body will take on water, but the cause of death is going to be strangulation, not drowning. Also for any kind of traumatic injuries. Now we got to talk about natural death for a second. If someone has a heart attack while they are swimming, and because they're having the heart attack as they're exercising in the water and they take on water and they drown, the cause of death is actually drowning, and the heart attack is listed on the death certificate under other significant conditions contributing to death. So even though the heart attack might have killed them on dry land, it might not have. Most certainly they wouldn't have drowned on dry land. So we defer to the hostile environment, which is the water, to call it a drowning. Now, identifying natural disease and identifying trauma is relatively easy in a fresh body. It can be very difficult in a decomposed body. His body was found 2 days after he disappeared, and this second autopsy done by Dr. Roger Mitchell wasn't until 4 days later. So we're dealing with quite a bit of decomposition, even if the body was refrigerated during that time. And then we have this other issue of the fact that not all the results are back. The toxicology would have been done on the fluids from the body from the first autopsy. From the second autopsy, you're going to have a lot higher alcohol levels from the decomposition caused by bacteria, not caused by drinking. So again, it's the fluid and blood from the first autopsy that really matter. And the other thing you have to consider, and there's one other important piece of information from that press conference, which is that the neck block, the portion of the neck from the front end, was missing. So Dr. Mitchell did not have a chance to examine that part of Nolan Wells' anatomy. Why is that important? Because if somebody is strangled, especially manual strangulation, the injuries are going to be to the front of the neck. There may be some redness at the back of the neck as well if, injury comes from behind, but generally this part of the neck doesn't have the major blood vessels and the airway. It's the front of the neck that does. So compression or damage to the front of the airway, that's going to be found in the neck block that is still sitting at the medical examiner's office that was not released with the body. So you may ask, is this common practice for pathologists to keep a portion of the anatomy with them at the medical examiner's office and not release it to the family? And the answer is yes. We will sometimes retain important specimens that have pathology in a jar under formaldehyde at the medical examiner's office for further examination or as evidence. And the absence of that neck block is really important because we still don't have information from the first autopsy that has not been released yet. So we don't know if it was kept out of an abundance of caution, meaning that it didn't have any findings and it was negative, or it was kept because it has findings, because there's a broken hyoid bone, or because there's hemorrhage in the strap muscles. Until we get that first autopsy report, we don't know why it's been retained. So why should anybody do a second autopsy? A second autopsy is often done in cases where there is a high-profile case such as this, or there is concern from the family for foul play, and they're just not getting answers from the medical examiner's office because the medical examiner's office is still doing their investigation and is keeping things under wraps, because if there is foul play, they have the evidence, they have the physical evidence that might be able to trap the killer, and they don't want to release that to the public. Even if there is no evidence of foul play, just the lack of evidence is evidence and is important information that might affect how people are interrogated, whether they're going to tell the truth or not the truth about what happened to him. You have to understand that the medical examiner's autopsy is legally mandated, and it is ultimately the most independent autopsy because it's not beholden to the family, it's not beholden to the prosecutor, to the police, to anybody else. It's an independent agency. So that is an independent autopsy, but it takes time. And it takes time until we get all the information back, including the toxicology report. And to answer the question, if somebody's intoxicated and they drown as a result of their intoxication, meaning that they're just, too intoxicated to be able to swim adequately, the cause of death would still be a drowning, but the intoxication would be considered a significant contributing condition. But because of what I said about alcohol forming from bacteria after death, if the body is decomposed, you have to subtract some of that alcohol because it may have been caused by bacteria and may not have been a sign of intoxication. And you can have up to 0.20 gram percent. So 0.08 is above the legal limit in most states for driving, but you can get up to 0.20 in a massively decomposed body. So it really throws you off when you have decomposition and alcohol to try to figure out whether there was alcohol on board or whether all of it's just been made by bacteria. So I hope this answers some questions about what I saw in the press conference, what other people saw as well. I will go through the autopsy, or at least the report that's been released with a fine-tooth comb, but these are just my first impressions based on watching the press report.
Why do we believe something just because it's said with confidence? Why does our mind stop questioning the second someone in authority speaks with...
You're about to hear something most true crime channels got wrong. A sheriff stood in front of cameras and said there was no foul play, no autopsy had happened yet, no pathologist had looked at the body. He said it anyway. Nolan Wells had been missing for days. His body turned up in the water on July 6th. Within hours, officials handed you a conclusion before they had any evidence to support it. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what a board-certified forensic pathologist actually found when she reviewed this case. Not the version that went viral. And you'll know about one piece of evidence the state kept for itself, evidence that never made it to the second autopsy, and still hasn't been released. Drowning sounds simple. It isn't. Forensic pathologists call it a diagnosis of exclusion. You can't just look at a body in water and call it drowning. You have to rule out everything else first. Gunshots, stabbing, strangulation, heart attacks. Only then can you land on drowning. So ask yourself, how does a sheriff rule out everything else in a matter of hours? He can't. Nobody can. Nolan's family didn't accept the official story quietly. They brought in their own pathologist. They brought in attorney Ben Crump. What that second examination found is where this story actually starts. You need to hear it. So what did the second autopsy actually find? That's next. The evidence. Dr. Judy Melinek is a board-certified forensic pathologist. She has zero connection to either side of this case, and when she reviewed the available findings, she gave you something rare, an honest, careful answer. Drowning is a diagnosis of exclusion, she explained. You can't call it drowning until you rule out trauma, disease, and injury first. Nolan's body sat in water for 2 days before anyone found it. The first autopsy happened after that. The second, independent autopsy didn't happen for 4 more days. That's 6 days of decomposition working against every examiner who touched this case. Decomposition doesn't just complicate things. It destroys information. Tissue breaks down. Discoloration appears that may or may not mean anything. Dr. Melinek pointed to one specific finding, a 12 by 8 inch area of red discoloration on the back of Nolan's head. No skull fracture, no cut through the skin, just discoloration, in a body already breaking down. It could be a sign of injury, she said, or it could be pressure from the autopsy table itself. Only microscopic tissue analysis can tell you which one is true, but here's what she didn't have access to. The front of Nolan's neck, the part that actually matters for strangulation, never made it to the second autopsy. The state kept it. That's called a neck block, and retaining tissue as evidence is normal practice. What's not normal is the silence around why. Was it kept because it showed nothing, or because it showed something the public hasn't seen yet? Nobody outside that medical examiner's office knows. Not the family, not the independent pathologist, not you, and that absence is about to matter more than you think. Why does that one piece of tissue matter so much? You're about to find out. The key question. Here's why that missing tissue changes everything. Dr. Melinek broke down exactly what forensic pathologists look for in strangulation cases, and every single marker lives in the front of the neck. 5 things examiners search for. The hyoid bone, a small, fragile bone in the upper throat that can fracture under pressure. The strap muscles, thin muscles along the front of the neck where internal bleeding can occur. Petechiae, tiny burst blood vessels, often found in the eyes or face. Airway compression, physical damage to the trachea itself. Bruising patterns consistent with manual pressure. None of these are in the back of the neck. That's the only region the second autopsy actually had access to. So here's your key question. How do you rule out strangulation if you never examine the one place strangulation would show up? You can't. And Dr. Melinek didn't pretend otherwise. She said the absence of that tissue means you can't confirm trauma, but you can't rule it out either. That's not a dramatic claim. That's just physically true. Then there's the toxicology problem. A decomposing body can produce its own alcohol through bacteria alone. No drinking required. Melinek explained readings could reach 0.20% from decomposition alone, with 0 alcohol actually consumed. So if anyone hands you a number from a toxicology report as proof of intoxication, ask them one thing: whose toxicology and from which autopsy? Here's the part almost nobody says out loud. Dr. Melinek herself said the police investigation, not a lab report, will make or break this case. Not the doctor, not the lab, the investigation. Does that change how you're watching this story? If you had to guess right now, accident or something else, what's telling you that? The doctor gave you the science. Now watch what the timeline does to it. The truth taking shape. Line up what actually happened, because the order changes everything. Nolan goes missing. Days pass. His body surfaces in the water. The sheriff announces no foul play before any autopsy happens. Notice that. Before, the state performs its own autopsy first. 4 days later, the family's independent pathologist finally gets access. By then, the body has decomposed for 6 days total. Ask yourself, whose interests does that timeline serve? The independent autopsy didn't rule accident. It didn't rule homicide either. It landed on undetermined. That word gets misunderstood constantly. Undetermined doesn't mean nothing happened. It means the evidence available wasn't enough to land anywhere else. One side gave you a fast, certain answer within hours. The other side, working far more carefully, told you they couldn't be certain at all. Which one actually sounds more trustworthy to you? Here's the detail that should sit with you. The tissue that could answer the strangulation question sits in a jar at the medical examiner's office right now. Not destroyed, not analyzed publicly, just withheld. Sit with that for a second. Ben Crump and the family aren't asking for a conviction. They're asking for access. The original autopsy report, the retained tissue, a toxicology reading that accounts for decomposition. Do you think that tissue ever gets released? Or does it sit in that jar forever? The evidence exists. What happens to it next is still an open question. The unresolved close. So where does that actually leave you? This case isn't unsolvable, it's incomplete. Those are 2 very different things. Unsolvable means the answers are gone forever. Incomplete means the answers exist, they just haven't been handed over yet. 3 things would move this case forward immediately. The original autopsy report, released in full. The retained neck tissue, examined independently. A toxicology reading that accounts for 6 days of decomposition. None of that requires speculation. It requires disclosure. Nobody's been charged. Nobody's been named a suspect. Dr. Melinek never said Nolan was strangled. She said you can't rule it out, because the evidence to check it was never released. A family is asking for records that already exist, sitting in a building, waiting. If that neck tissue got released tomorrow, what do you think it would actually show?